So attributes are used to describe either entities or relationships even better, which means they'll give you more description about what we are representing, right? For example, the more attributes we have, the better information we could get. For example, let us say a person, name is an attribute, age, maybe address, phone number, all these are attributes. The more attributes we keep on adding to an entity, the more information we get for that entity, and the better way we could describe it. So attributes are actually going to increase the way we describe an entity, and it is very useful in terms of queries. Okay, later we shall see that why attributes are important, but for now let's say attributes are useful, right? And they are going to be main use of it is describing something. Okay, now what are the various types of attributes is there are various ways I am going to classify attributes. So let's classify all of them, and then we shall describe and then we shall discuss about what is the relationship between one classification and the other, right? So let's take this simple one. Assume that person is an entity, right? And now person will be having a name. These are all the attributes, right? Name is an attribute which will describe a person, and maybe age is an attribute, right? And it will even better describe a person, and maybe address is an attribute, maybe phone number is also an attribute, right? Now let's see what does it mean. First one is, we can classify attributes as simple attributes and composite attributes. So simple and composite means, simple means it cannot be divided further. Composite means it can even be divided further. For example, if you take name, we can divide it further. Like you can say a person is having first name, middle name, last name, right? So even name can be divided into composed of three, right? First name, middle name, and last name. Got it? Now what does it mean? Actually name is an attribute which is composed of many attributes, right? That is why it is called as composite attribute, because it is composed of many attributes, and these are called simple. Simple attributes means they cannot be divided further. Got it? So they cannot be divided further. That is why they are called simple. And sometimes what happens is, even though we have an attribute, an entity might not have any value for that attribute. For example, you might not have a middle name, you might have just the first name and then last name, but then in order to save your data into this particular entity, what we are supposed to have is we have to fill the entire information, right? Then what we do is null values. We introduce null values to say either the value does not exist or the value is not applicable, right? So what is the main difference between not applicable and does not contain is, for example, phone number. Phone number is applicable to you, but you might not have a phone, right? Which means it does not exist. Not applicable means you might not have any middle name at all. That's why this field is not applicable for you. Either if it is not applicable for you or if it doesn't exist, we are going to use null values. Okay. Here the main difference between composite and simple is, composite is a collection of simple attributes, and simple attributes cannot be even further divided. So name is a composite attribute which is a collection of first name, middle name, and last name, and either first name or middle name or last name cannot be further divided. Okay. And next one is single valued attribute versus multi-valued attribute. So single valued and multi-valued means, just take an example. For example, let us say phone number. A phone number may be multi-valued attribute. The reason is, some person might have more than one phone number. He might be using more than one phone number. Maybe one is a Delhi number and other is Hyderabad number, something like that, right? Then what happens is, if you have two phone numbers, then the field, that attribute, may be defined as multi-valued attribute, which will take more than one value, right? So example is phone number. Or maybe some people may be having two houses, right? Then maybe he must be having two house addresses, right? Therefore an address can also be a multi-valued attribute. What about age? Age cannot be a multi-valued attribute, isn't it? At any point of time, a person will have only one age, right? And for most of the celebrities, it is going to be constant, right? All the time. Anyway, age is a single valued attribute. Whatever it is, it has to be only one value. You cannot say that I am 10 years old and I am 100 years old, right? It has to be either 10 or 100. So it cannot be multi-valued. So single valued means we are going to have only one value to such an, we are going to assign only one value to such an attribute. We will never assign more than one values, right? Multi-valued means it can take more than one value at the same time, right? And what about stored? Stored and derived means we are going to store some information in our system, and then others we don't store them. Whenever they are required, we derive them, right? For example, I can have date of birth, right? Then depending on the date of birth, I can actually derive age, right? Therefore I need not store age. I'll just store date of birth, and whenever it is required, depending on the present date and the date of birth, I'll just derive the age, right? Therefore in that way, age can be a derived value attribute, and date of birth can be a stored attribute. Got it? So now if a attribute happens to be one of these categories, it doesn't mean that it cannot be the other one. For example, let's take this name. Name is a composite attribute, right? As well as name is a single valued attribute, because a person can have only one name. He cannot have more than one name. Even though the name is containing many subparts, it doesn't mean that a person is having many names, right? So at any point of time, he is going to have only one name. That name itself is a combination of first name, last name and middle name, right? Therefore this is actually composite as well as single valued attribute, right? And what about age? Age is single valued attribute. You have only one value, but it can be derived, right? Therefore it is single valued as well as derived. And what about address? Address may be address may be either single valued attribute or multi-valued attribute, right? So let us say address is multi-valued attribute. In our system, that all depends on you, the designer, how you want it to be, right? And while designing it, you can have it either to be single valued or multi-valued. Let us say you defined it to be multi-valued attribute. Then what happens to address? Address is a person can have more than one address, right? And moreover, the address itself is a composite, which means street name, city name, country, pin code. So address is actually composite, and a person may have more than one addresses, right? Then it is a collection of both multi-valued as well as composite attributes, right? So such a attribute which is a collection of or a combination of composite and multi-valued, it is called as complex attribute. Complex attribute means it is having many fields as well as the values are also many, right? So composite means a collection of, complex means a collection of composite and multi-valued, right? So maybe you can even make this phone number also as complex. So if the phone number is going to contain STD code and the telephone ID, and a person if he's going to have more than one phone number, then it is multi-valued as well as composite. Composite means containing of two attributes. Got it? And date of birth is going to be single valued, and it is stored attribute. It cannot be derived, it has to be stored, right? So the main way, see, I want to categorize a attribute to be either of composite or simple, or like this or like this, but then it doesn't mean that all these are mutually exclusive. A single valued attribute can be simple attribute, like that. Okay, so anyway, they are going to ask you, by specifying everything, they'll specify everything, and they'll ask you what type of attribute is best suitable for this. And let us say they'll in the description, in the verbal description, they'll say this: a person in our database, let us say an employee in our company can reside at any time in two flats. One is in one city headquarters and other is in a branch, right? Now what should we define the address field to be, address attribute to be? A composite, complex, multi-valued, single value, like this, right? So if they even say that address is going to contain street name, the street number and city, pin code, everything, then you have to derive it this way. See, so let us say first thing is they are going to describe an employee is going to reside in two places, right? Then what is the address attribute going to be? Then the address attribute is going to be multi-valued, right? Or they will say an employee is going to have an address, and address can consist of street number, pin code, city, country, everything. Then what is the address going to be? Address is going to be composite. And then they'll say an employee is having two addresses, and address is going to contain all these fields. Then what is address going to be? It is going to be complex. Got it? Right? And let us say they'll just just for the sake of an example, let us say an employee is having a phone number, and at any time he is having a handheld this mobile device as well as a landline. What type of attribute is the phone number going to be? Multi-valued attribute. Got it? And maybe let us say an employee is going to have name, and the name is going to contain first name and last name. What type of attribute would you suggest in the design? So what is it? It is a composite, right? So they are going to ask you which one is best suited, which type of attribute is best suited in order to represent this particular feature of the entity. That is, you can just look at this and you can answer such questions. Got it? Okay.